Now it's quite clear that the new Zelda game is a massive hit, and I get why. It's an incredibly fun game after all. However, compared to the previous title, Breath of the Wild, some things did change. And one thing that me and Toby from the Absurd Zelda Theories channel noticed is that a lot of the claims about the Barbarian armor don't fit anymore. Many said it was originally from the Zonai, but now that we have seen them in cutscenes and even in-game, it doesn't really make sense anymore. So where does this armor set really come from? Well, today, me and Toby will find out, so let's dive right in. Now to start this video off, we will look at the armor itself. It is quite a rough looking set that was clearly used by a more primitive society, and according to its description, the armor was worn by the warriors of an ancient warlike tribe from the Faron region, with the war paint bolstering your fighting spirit and raising your attack power, which is the main reason why most people get it. Aside from this, not much is known about this set. In many ways, Nintendo left it all one big mystery, and so ever since we saw it in Breath of the Wild, people have been making loads of theories on it, all speculating about the origin of this set, and many came to the conclusion that it was most likely of Zonai origin. But now, with Tears of the Kingdom being out, a lot has changed actually. We have seen the Zonai, and if you look at their weapons, technology, architecture and more, then all of a sudden the Barbarian armor set doesn't look like a good fit at all. Heck, we have even seen an actual Zonai set that looks very different. In the end, it resembles Aztec or Mayan designs. It uses completely different materials. So all of a sudden, the claim that the Barbarian set was originally from the Zonai doesn't make sense anymore. Especially if you think about the description, which mentions a warlike tribe, it doesn't fit. As far as we've seen from flashbacks in Tears of the Kingdom, they only acted out of self-defense. They are never on the offensive. The Zonai themselves are seen taking a diplomatic approach despite knowing Ganondorf's evil intent. It's clear that war is not on their mind. However, this leaves us with a problem. What is the real origin of this set then? Well, let's see what we can find.
Faron is a region in the southeast of Hyrule Kingdom. It's a jungle-like area, and the only people that seem to live here are the inhabitants of Lurlin Village, a small fisher's village. Other than that, there are ancient stone landmarks, and the coast of the region has beaches, and of course, the dense jungle itself. Inside this thick rainforest, there are lots of animals and fruits and plants, like the hearty durians and mighty bananas, are growing. But there are signs of a civilization that was there once before. If you look close enough at the various rock formations that are jetting up through the floor, you'll realize that they're not natural. They're ruins that have been long since abandoned. There are buildings and paths, pillars, walls and statues and more, all from an old civilization that once lived deep in this jungle. These ruins can very clearly be linked to the Zonai, so at the time of Breath of the Wild's release, it was safe to assume that the warlike tribe that used to live deep in the Faron region, as mentioned in the description of the Barbarian armor, was in fact the Zonai. But as Wily has pointed out, now with the release of Tears of the Kingdom, that doesn't make any sense. Despite this, the description of the armor set remains exactly the same in Tears of the Kingdom, so perhaps the idea is that these relics that have been dug up from an ancient time are simply being misunderstood by the people that discovered them. It seems that modern Hyrulean scholars don't fully understand where the set came from. And we think it's likely that the Barbarian armor probably isn't even from the Zonai. So if it's not made by them, then who did make this set of clothing? Well, this is where we come to a couple of different ideas. The first and most likely pitch in my mind is that this is tied to Ganondorf, and this ties back to even the first trailer of Tears of the Kingdom before the game even had its name. The demonic horns and red hair definitely evoke the imagery of Ganondorf, but perhaps this is in fact the skull of a fierce creature that once roamed the lands of Hyrule but doesn't exist anymore. Many think it's supposed to represent the demon form of Ganondorf known as Ganon. So maybe this barbaric set was actually worn by the followers of Ganondorf long ago, and there is proof for this. In the very first trailer for Tears of the Kingdom, we see Link and Zelda traveling past what appears to be ancient paintings on the walls below Hyrule Castle. Here we also see what looks like Ganondorf with his trident on horseback, declaring war against the Kingdom of Hyrule with some of his humanoid followers. We think there's a good chance that these followers were actually the ones that wore the Barbarian armor alongside many of his Gerudo followers. It would make makes sense, of course, for the followers of Ganondorf to be a warmongering tribe with a helmet that represents their master, Ganon. This idea is further developed in Tears of the Kingdom. Originally in Breath of the Wild, the 3 pieces of the Barbarian armor were in the 3 Lomi labyrinths across the map. But in Tears of the Kingdom, the Lomi labyrinths now contain something different, the armor pieces of Phantom Ganon. Gloom can also be found culminating in these ruins where both Phantom Ganons and Zonai constructs are defending the armor equally. This idea of the Barbarian armor having ties to Ganondorf is something people claimed back in the day, but it makes even more sense now that we have all this new info. However, this isn't the only option out there.
In Tears of the Kingdom, we find out more about the history of Hyrule, or at least its new history since they rebooted the game's story. It turns out the Zonai were crucial to the development of the Hylians and actually helped with the creation of the kingdom. Heck, the first king wasn't even a Hylian, but actually a Zonai known as Rauru. But what did the world look like before this? Well, this is a bit of a mystery. We don't really know which timeline this game takes place in, or if the whole timeline was unified somehow. Nintendo made everything vague on purpose, which all started in Breath of the Wild, where basically all the timelines were mentioned. So let's not think about all of that for a second. We aren't really in the mood to figure all of that out now. The point I'm trying to make is that the Hylians and world existed before the Zonai came and established or re-established the Kingdom of Hyrule. So it could be that the Barbarian armor set is actually a set that was used by early Hylians before they became more civilized. I bet before the Zonai came down and created order, we saw a lot of smaller groups and warring tribes. Similar to what we saw during the Hyrulean Civil War, which took place before Ocarina of Time. This was a war over the Triforce and many Hyruleans had perished. And when the war finally ended, it resulted in the unification of Hyrule under one banner. So we think that this armor was actually from a Hylian subset before the kingdom was established by the Zonai. We can't be sure of this, but it is a possibility. However, we have one last idea.
Even though we got a lot more information on the Zonai from Tears of the Kingdom, we still know very little about them. So maybe instead of early Hylians using this set or followers of Ganondorf, it was the Zonai who actually used it a long time ago. This armor set is of course tied to the ruins of the Zonai after all, so there must be some sort of a connection. Maybe it was created a long time ago, before the rise of Ganondorf, a time where the Triforce piece of power was still held in high regard. This is because in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, we can see that all over Zonai architecture found on the surface, there are 3 statues representing the 3 triangles and aspects of the Triforce in the form of the dragon, the bird, and the boar. While the bird and the dragon represent wisdom and courage respectively, and they still stand in many of the locations, the boar has often been tipped over or left to collapse. These are the statues that represent the Triforce piece of power, and they're completely destroyed. It seems like there was a split at some point in Zonai history before the Zonai that we see in Tears of the Kingdom, where their tribe moved away from this barbaricness and instead moved towards a more technologically advanced, wisdom and courage-inspired armor. We see this, of course, in the Zonai armor and the way that it looks in Tears of the Kingdom, with the Zonai armor actually increasing the efficiency of your Zonai devices instead of increasing your damage output. This is a clear move towards wisdom and away from power. Also, I'm going to give a shout out here to @PigandTeaBreak on Twitter, who suggested to me the idea that the Zonai, before they existed in the sky and as the gods that the Hylians know them as, originally lived below the surface, in the depths. Their technology and depots could be seen everywhere. Perhaps it was here in the depths, by mining Zonite, that they discovered technological advances and they moved away from their barbaric ways, potentially ditching that armor and then ascending to the surface by following the paths of wisdom. But perhaps that's a little bit too speculative for now. It's the kind of thing I'd love to put into an absurd Zelda theory. If you don't know what an absurd Zelda theory is, there's Zelda theories, the ones that make a lot of sense, and I think at least one of these 3 options does make a lot of sense. You'll have to let us know which you think makes the most sense in the comments. An absurd Zelda theory, though, that plays fast and loose with the rules and the idea that it is just the legends of Zelda. It points out things that look similar, like perhaps frogs, because there's a whole bunch of frogs that are very godly and very similar in Zelda, including the bubble frogs, which me and Wily discuss in depth in their relation perhaps to Cyclos and Zephos from Wind Waker over on my channel, Absurd Zelda Theories, so we will see you over there. Be sure to hop on over like a frog would hop. That's terrible. That's an awful... Don't trust me to end your videos, Wily. I'm no good at it. Ribbit.